higher quality jobs into my community than to have no factory at all.
Yeah. Look, it's still hard for people to, it's puzzling for people because as Mark Zandi, chief economist at Moody's Analytics says, the economy came into this year performing exceptionally well. And a few months later, it's gagging. Not just because of tariffs, but the haphazard cuts to jobs and government funding and the uncertainty. You're among those who say it is worth it. But what do you say to people who said, wait a second, I didn't vote for this. I voted for my grocery prices to go down, not for everything else to go up. This is not what people expected.
I think this is exactly what they voted for when they voted for the president. He ran on a platform of transforming the economy. We're now entering a second phase of that plan to bring industry back to the United States and to make it competitive again.
Do you agree with analysts who say bringing manufacturing back, if that is even practical, would take 10 years?
I think different industries are going to see different levels of reintegration in the American economy.
But is 10 years one outlook?
Regardless of what the amount of time it takes, it doesn't make up for the fact that we made the wrong decision for 30 years. And the need to turn the ship around is independent for how long we're going to get completely to where we need to be.
Why not do targeted tariffs on China?
China remains the central problem, but the world trade system that we have today is integrated, and what we've seen over the last 5 years is that China has used transshipments through third countries like Vietnam, Malaysia, and Mexico to get into the United States market without the tariffs that the first administration put on.
You know, why not train people to work in services, medicine, education, which is, you know, manufacturing only employs about 8% of U.S. workers. Why this pain for something that seems to be going away, manufacturing?
Well, it's going away because of the failed policies of the last 30 years.
Isn't it going away because a huge percentage of the people who work in the U.S. are working in new things, in medicine and education? Why not take the money to train more people in that?
The United States has not just lost t-shirts and sneakers. We've lost our advanced technology manufacturing. The technology that anchors our industrial base, that would fuel any future war effort, like the ones we're so proud of in the World War II and the Cold War, those were built on an industrial base that existed before there was a need for them. And if we lose that, we can't have an economy where everybody's a doctor, everybody's a teacher, and everybody's a barber. You need goods and services to trade with foreign markets to support the services industries.
Mark DePlacido, policy advisor at the conservative think tank American Compass. It was energizing to speak with you. Thank you.
Yes, I appreciate the robust conversation.
Yeah. And we will continue it. We want as many different voices as we can get, here and now.
The data you share on your taxes is private, regardless of immigration status. But the current administration wants to change that.
You're trying to force people to be in a situation where they're not obeying the laws that they're trying to follow, and then later you want to find ways that you're going to deport them for not following them.
I'm Kimberly Adams. A tax catch-22. Next time on Marketplace.
Tonight at 7 on Public Radio 89.5.
While the future of federal public media funding is pretty uncertain, the importance of trusted, independent journalism is as clear as day. Hi, I'm Public Radio Tulsa General Manager Rich Fisher, and here's something else that has never been more important. Listener support, our support. So please make a difference by supporting this station and its mission. It's quick and easy online. Just click the red donate button at publicradiotulsa.org. And thank you.
Support for Public Radio Tulsa is provided by the Kendall College of Arts and Sciences at the University of Tulsa, preparing students for life and leadership for 130 years. More at artsandsciences.utulsa.edu.
National Public Radio from the University of Tulsa. Public Radio 89.5 KWGS HD1 Tulsa.
Funding for Here and Now comes from the listeners of WBUR Boston and your NPR station, and Rhodes Scholar, celebrating 50 years of transformative learning adventures for adults in over 100 countries. Learn more at rhodesscholar.org/explore.
It's Here and Now. It has been a rough few months for scientists and researchers, not only dealing with cuts to programs, grants, and agencies, but also the erasure of information they depend on for their work. This is in areas ranging from climate to medicine to public health. Well, now researchers are also in a race against the clock to preserve the data. Scientists from the Harvard School of Public Health held a data preservation marathon in late January. The End of Term Web Archive Coalition is working on archiving government websites. And another group, Public Environmental Data Partners, is archiving hundreds of sets of environment-related data and simultaneously trying to recreate the internet tools needed to make sense of the environmental data. The government has already removed those. Jesse Marr is Director of Technology at the Environmental Policy Innovation Center, one of the groups working with the Data Partners Group. Lots of groups forming here. And Jesse joins us now. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
And we should say we just had a terrific piece recently on NPR about the Internet Archive. This is this huge facility where independent people are archiving the internet, as much of it as they can scrape and get for fear that it will go away. The difference between them and you is that you're working on these tools, right, so that people can access the data.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And one way that I like to think about it is, we know physical infrastructure like bridges and roads and highways. And what this is the digital infrastructure, but imagine these tools like a bridge. So the Internet Archive and government agencies are collecting so much information, but we don't have the ability to access that information without this bridge or without that tool that makes sense of what is going on.
Right. Well, we're reading that your volunteers are working to archive 100 sets of data that they fear will soon be removed by the current administration. They have a list of 300 more they plan to preserve. But as you said, you're working on recreating the tools that make sense of all this data. But what are we talking about? What kind of information do they access?
So there are 9 different screening tools that federal agencies use to understand who doesn't have safe drinking water, where's there air pollution, where there's sewage in neighborhoods, where there's high rates of unemployment, where's there low-income communities. And so these tools help aggregate all of that information to understand where should we improve the public health and lives of Americans. Anything that had an environmental justice lens has been taken offline and is no longer accessible, nor is it accessible to the government agencies that depended on it for administering their own programs. The most common or most popular were the Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool and EPA's EJ Screen.
Okay. And tell us how that might work. Like, why might somebody want to use, you mentioned the Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool, that's CEJST. What would they be trying to find out?
So they're using this tool to say, where do we have overlapping challenges? Where's there flooding risks? Where's there high pollution? Where's there high rates of unemployment? And then prioritizing funding and programs and interventions to improve people's lives.
Yeah. And nonprofit organizations use these screening tools to apply for federal grants related to environmental justice and climate change.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, but the EPA had to shut down all its environmental justice offices. Talk about the impact that this will have.
There's federal agencies that rely on this, but state agencies, local agencies, community advocates, people that just want to know for themselves what's happening in my environment. They all depend on this, and these community members that are applying for grants are still required to use the outputs from these tools to justify that they should receive assistance. And so when the federal government takes it away, they need these still, and that's what we've been able to stand up and recreate.
Well, the New York Times gives a great example. More than 100 tribal nations, cities, and nonprofits used the CEJST to show where their community might need trees. We absolutely know, it's proven science, that impoverished communities have fewer green spaces, 10 degrees hotter temperatures, as we had here in the Boston area, which became life-threatening. So there was a fund from the Arbor Day Foundation, a nonprofit. They had a grant from the Inflation Reduction Act. These things are all webbed together, and people could apply through the tool to get some of that money to have trees planted. Now, the grant was terminated also in February, but that's something that tool might be used for.
Yeah, that's right. So it's being able to understand what are the challenges that I face within my community. And I think you're exactly right, though, that this is in a larger ecosystem of challenges. So first you have the policies that say, we care about improving American lives and having a healthy and safe environment. We then need the data to collect and show where is that happening, where is that not happening. And then the tools make sense of that data and help us prioritize where to improve people's lives. And then we have the programs and the money and the initiatives
Right.
that actually do that work. And across all of those fronts, we're seeing protections being taken back and initiatives and funding being taken away.
Well, meantime, as you've said, a lot is still in place. The concern is some of this online data will be taken away, so people are quickly scraping it to try to get it. Your team is trying to replicate the tools which are already gone. What a detective story. How do they do this?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's one way that I like to think about it, right, is you have all the ingredients in your pantry, and that's all the data sets. And they were there, but we didn't often have that recipe of, well, how do I put these ingredients together to make a tasty meal or a useful tool? And so when we had the recipe, it was really simple to recreate that. And that's the value for the tech nerds amongst us of building in the open source. When we didn't have that recipe or the directions for how to recreate this tool, like in the case of the EJ screen, it was a lot of trial and error. And we had, dozens of people in our network that used this tool and knew, okay, I know that this functionality is there, and I know that that functionality is here, so let's try to recreate that. But that's taken weeks, and we're still trying to bring back online all of those different functionalities that, made it the robust tool that it was in helping understand public health and environmental conditions.
We understand it took at least 7 people in your group more than 3 weeks to make a version of EJ Screen. And again, this is the environmental justice screening tool. But you're still not there yet. All these different groups that are either scraping material to preserve it, or as you are, trying to recreate the tools where people could use this government data. Are you talking to each other? Is there also a hive of scientists who are doing this work, scraping?
Yeah, I think that's been the bright spot of all of this work, is this huge ecosystem of folks that have come together that have collective knowledge and understanding of this information, the impact on people's lives, and the importance of it. And so we've been kind of a collective, the public environmental data partners of dozens of different folks and organizations, but I can say we put out a call to get involved and got 600 responses within 2 weeks. And there's just so many people that want to contribute to this work and understand the importance. And so it's been really phenomenal to work in community in that respect.
Well, we should say, I mentioned the EJ screen. CJEST, which again is the Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool, was open source, so the data and information that backed it up were publicly accessible for all your coders and researchers, I'm reading, and 3 people could put that back together in 24 hours.
That's exactly right.
What does it feel like to be watching researchers, people from NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration?
Yeah.
These are climate measurements. These are things that your local meteorologist looks at.
Yeah.
How hard is it to see this either go away or be threatened?
It's really disappointing, and I think one thing just to keep in mind is that these tools had 100,000 users on a monthly basis that depended on this to understand and make really smart decisions about improving Americans' lives. And one piece about this is there are data sets and hardware that's out in the environment that's collecting this information, and we're also seeing that folks that do that hardware and measurements and field work aren't allowed to go to the field or maintain those in situ networks. I've heard from folks that are doing dam safety inspections. They're supposed to be in the office 9 to 5, but the nature of their work is going to the field and saying, are these dams safe? Might they collapse, or might there be challenges that we need to address? And that, has a direct impact on the safety of the people in those areas, and we need to be able to actually maintain this infrastructure in the long run.
Because I imagine those dam inspectors then go and put that information that they find in data.
In the database of national hazardous dams.
Yeah.
And so that hazardous dams database is then what helps us prioritize and make improvements and fund the either removal of those dams or restoration where needed.
We're reading that farmers have already sued the Department of Agriculture for deleting the climate data tools that they are hoping to get back. So it's a farmer, that you're doing this work for. Yeah. It's a meteorologist. It's somebody who wants to plant a tree in an impoverished neighborhood. So Jesse Moore, how many tools do you and your group have left?
So right now we have preserved 6 of the 9 federal environmental justice screening tools, looking to restand back all of those. You can find them all on screeningtools.com. One of the ways to think about this, or I guess something that drives me in this work, right, is my family's from Cancer Alley in Louisiana, and we've had a lot of family members die from cancer living near paper mills and chemical processing plants. And the data is not going to improve people's lives, but understanding where those challenges are and then having the policies and the funding and the staff to then address those pollutants is what does improve public health and environment in the long run.
That's Jessie Barr, Director of Technology at the Environmental Policy Innovation Center, one of the groups working with the Public Environmental Data Partners. They are trying to archive government data, and Jessie's group is trying to help recreate the tools that have already been removed that allow the public to have access to that data. Jessie, thanks so much.
Thanks.
You're listening to Here and Now.
From NPR News in Boston, I'm Sharon Brody. Financial markets around the world are in turmoil after President Trump's new round of tariffs. U.S. stocks tumbled. At last check, the Dow had dropped over 3.75%. The S&P 500 was down over 4.25%. The Nasdaq plunged over 5.5%. The Pentagon's acting inspector general is beginning an evaluation of Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth's use of the commercially available Signal messaging app to discuss military operations. The memo from Stephen Stebbins follows a request from Congress for a probe into the incident reported by The Atlantic last month, in which Hegseth and other top Trump administration officials discussed military actions in Yemen on the unsecured network and looped in The Atlantic's editor-in-chief. Former Vice President Mike Pence will receive the John F. Kennedy Profile and Courage Award for his refusal to go along with President Trump's efforts to remain in office after losing the 2020 election. Kennedy's family announced today that the award will recognize Pence for putting his life and career on the line to ensure the constitutional transfer of presidential power on January 6, 2021. Trump pressured Pence to reject election results from swing states where Trump falsely claimed the vote was marred by fraud. Pence refused. You're listening to Here and Now.
On the next Fresh Air, songwriter, singer, and guitarist Jason Isbell, who is described in Variety as the Poet Laureate of American rock. He won 9 Americana Music Awards and 6 Grammys. His new solo album includes songs about the breakup of his marriage to singer-songwriter and violinist Amanda Shires. Join us.
See the windmills turn up 50.
This afternoon at 3 and tonight at 9 on Public Radio 89.5.
Support for Public Radio Tulsa is provided by the Tulsa Zoo, presenting the Zoo Run, April 12th. With a 10K, 5K, and 1 mile fun run, there's a pace for everyone while supporting the zoo's conservation mission. More at tulsazoo.org/run.
Public Radio 89.5, KWGS HD1 Tulsa. National Public Radio in HD from the University of Tulsa.
Funding for Here and Now comes from the Museum of Science in Boston, dedicated to inspiring a lifelong love of science in everyone, in museums, classrooms, and online, offering engineering design challenges, digital experiences, live presentations, and more. MOS.org. And Loomis Sales, working to fulfill the investment needs of institutional and retail clients worldwide by integrating proprietary research and risk analysis to develop a customized approach for each investor. LoomisSales.com.
It's Here and Now. The bird flu outbreak is having a major impact on the poultry industry. It's also killing a majestic bird that migrates through northern Indiana. WBEZ's Michael Puente reports.
On a cold February morning, Sean Leone got up before the crack of dawn to see a sight right outside of his house. That's the sound of thousands of sandhill cranes on a sheet of ice on Fish Lake in northern Indiana, about 90 miles east of Chicago. Sandhill cranes have tall gray bodies with a hint of crimson on their face.
Here they go. Taking the flight. Sandhill cranes heading up. There's thousands of them.
has been living on Fish Lake for decades. He says the crane's annual visits are one of his favorite things about living here. But about a week after he shot this video, Leone noticed something troubling.
Well, I started making the phone calls to DNR on February 16th, and that's when I first picked up the first 3. And then after about 3-4 days later, I started seeing more dying, and then I called them again. This is the first time I've ever seen sand cranes ever wash up on shore.
A few turned into dozens of dead sandhill cranes. Many of the fallen birds could be seen on the frozen ice sheet, others floating into the shore or winding up in the grassy brush.
There were 1,957 sandhill cranes reported as dead.
That's Eli Fleece, fish and wildlife biologist with the Indiana Department of Natural Resources.
Because this is just based off of the reports that we get. So if, a crane dies out in the woods somewhere, nobody sees it, we don't get that one reported.
Fleece says what's causing the deaths is bird flu, also known as avian influenza, the same virus that's killing tens of thousands of chickens throughout the country. It's obviously not the first outbreak of bird flu in the U.S., but Fleece says it's the first time the virus has failed sandhill cranes.
The past years, I have not seen avian influenza affect the sandhills at all, but my theory is that the virus may have mutated this past year, and so now it's more able to infect sandhill cranes than it was previously.
Back at Fish Lake, Leone says it's hard watching these elegant birds succumb to an illness.
They would stand like a statue for